Welcome to Secrets from the Scene, a show for local musicians who want to improve their music, grow their audience, and learn about Minnesota's music scene. If you're interested in talking about all things music related and meeting interesting people from our local community, you're in the right place. Welcome to Secrets from the Scene. My name is Stephen Helvig and I'm your host. Today's episode is going to be called, Do I Need to Go to Audio School for Recording? And my guest is the perfect guest to answer that question. I've got Matt Holmes here from Hennepin Tech. He's been a professor there for a very long time and is one of, or the last, audio program standing in the state here. And it's been around for a long time. I know a lot of people have gone through the program. I hired one myself. Max is a former graduate of Hennepin Tech, as well as several other friends and colleagues in the business here. So I'm excited to hear about Hennepin Tech, about Matt's background, and to talk about this important subject because it's a question that gets asked a lot. And it's a valid question. With all the resources that are out there today, do you actually need to go to school to get into that part of the industry or to learn that skill? So we're going to break that down, all the pros and cons, and give you some key takeaways to think about. But before we do all of that, this is episode 61. And we are officially at the 1-year mark of the podcast. So it feels like a huge accomplishment. And I want to take a second to thank Max Green and Joey Bean, my two helpers on the podcast, partners in crime, for getting this far. It's been quite a journey. We've learned a lot. We've done 61 episodes. And be thankful to everybody that's tuned in and supported it and sent us a message. Seriously, thank you for all of that. We're going to take a break for a little while, at least through the holidays, and then see what we're going to do when we come back. I anticipate we'll have some version of a season 2 in 2025, but I know for sure that we want to hear more from you, the listeners. What do you like? What do you not like? What would you miss? What do you want to know more about? Do you have ideas for how we should do it differently in season 2? Because I feel like it might be time to switch things up and try some new angles. So really want feedback, and we'll if you follow us on Instagram, I'm sure you'll hear us talking about that and maybe doing some polls and things like that. So if you see that, please take a second to fill it out. Let us know your thoughts. That'll definitely help shape up what season 2 is going to be. But more than anything, thank you. If this is your first time joining it, there's a huge backlog. Go check out the episodes. The podcast is for local musicians. It's on all kinds of topics that cover the music scene here in Minnesota, but it applies to pretty much everywhere. And if you're a longtime listener, thank you. All right, without further ado, let's get into this. So, Matt Holmes, professor, audio engineer, and all-around good guy. Please welcome Matt Holmes.
Thanks, Stephen. Not professor, instructor, I would say. I don't have any.
Tomato.
I don't have any fancy letters after my name or anything like that. But yeah. Thanks for having me out here. This is a topic that we get asked a lot. But I've been teaching at Hennepin Tech now, going on 15 years. I'm actually graduate of the program myself, as probably many people that play music thought. Hey, I could probably figure out how to record myself. Right? Don't want to pay somebody for that. When I got into it in the early 2000s, equipment was a lot harder to have to record yourself, right? An early definitely. Pro Tools rig, you had like one person with a 001, like, oh my gosh, right? We got to go over to their place. So naturally, I figured, well, there's got to be a better way to figure this out and do it ourselves. So I actually went to Hennepin Tech, graduated from there, did the freelance thing, taught drum lessons, did the hustle to try to be, musically adjacent in some way, shape, or form. Mm-hmm. Ended up getting a chance to teach some adjunct classes, figured out I really love teaching something that I care about. I think if I was teaching math, I wouldn't like teaching, but because it's audio, keeps me sharp. Students that are also passionate about it, I really love helping them. And, blink of an eye now, it's been 15 years. Program's still running. It was one of the first in town, which is kind of cool to see it come full circle. Yeah.
Did you go right from high school to Hennepin Tech, or was there like gap years in there?
No, I went right to Hennepin Tech. I graduated early so that I could do my PSEO. I grew up in a small town in middle of nowhere, Minnesota, and quickly realized that, there was no music scene and wanted to be around other creative people. So I fast tracked and did everything I could so that I could go take my general education classes, and then went to Hennepin Tech. One of the members of my band, his brother had gone there prior. So before I could even drive, we had my dad drive us down there to be performers for it. So, being on that side of the glass was kind of cool. And we had some other recording experiences that were just absolutely horrible too. So that also shaped, my interest in getting into it. Again, thinking there's got to be a better way than, some of these people that I've seen that had pro studios, air quotes on.
Yeah. So from the time that you graduated Hennepin to starting to do adjunct classes, was that kind of immediate, or was there a gap there?
There's a little bit of a gap, where I was out doing, I had my internship, and then, hustling, recording whoever I could, doing the drum lesson thing, just kind of, the freelance, playing in bands.
A little bit of this, a little bit of that.
A little bit of this, a little bit of that, trying to make whatever money I can and, be creative and be involved with other musicians. So,
where did you intern?
Winterland Studios, actually. Worked with Todd Fitzgerald up there.
Sure.
And Brian Johnson, Zach. Oh, sorry, Zach, if you're seeing this, I forget your last name, but learned a ton, saw how a pro studio ran,
Totally.
Saw how, how to treat people in a studio, just learned so much about the non-technical side of it as much as the technical side.
Yeah.
But, a lot of times you have to see what happens behind the scenes to really figure out, if it's for you too, right? And I loved being a part of that creative process and helping people. And, that really solidified it for me, that I was like, I have to be a part of this in some way, shape, or form, for my career.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now that Winterland space is gone, right?
Yeah.
Todd's still working.
Yeah, Todd's still working out of other places. The kind of a random universal moment, I just finished up a big band album, and the bass player, Mike Johander, turns out he was the person that started that, opened that studio originally. Yeah, so we had a good chin wag talking about all the ins and outs and history of him buying that API console, and what his experience was like, owning a studio, as he was straight out of college too. And it was a very serendipitous moment that we ran into each other on a recording gig that I was doing then.
Fun. That studio was such a cool space. Sad to see that gone, but that's how everything goes here. Okay, so you start teaching, you've been doing that, and then I know that you also do a lot of audio engineering still on the side with Wild Sound.
Yep.
Up in Northeast.
Yeah. So I've been lucky. I've been up there, I think, for 8 to 10 years now, doing kind of contract work with them when I'm not teaching. Have to keep the knives sharp, and stay involved. And also that's just that is truly where my passion is working with musicians and, making records. And they have a lovely array of clients that come through. They're very talented, push me to be as good at my craft as I can, because they are far, in my opinion, outside of my league. Great musicians, super diverse in what we're doing. Like I said, I might be doing a big band, and then the other day I was doing a Spanish worship album, and then it might be just a run-of-the-mill, straightforward indie rock band. So that diversity of people that we work with up there is just amazing, and really, really love that space. Lots of fun toys for me, and it's been a blessing to be up there for as long as I have and work with all of those people. Yeah,
I've also been to Wild Sound. Beautiful place, super cool. Who owns Wild Sound?
Yeah. So right now it's Steve Call. The original owner was Matthew Zimmerman, and he had a previous space that was downtown, and quickly outgrew that with rent and all of the things that come with owning a space downtown, and happened to find a building up in Northeast that he could purchase too, which, as a studio owner, is kind of an important thing if you can do it. So you
certainly
don't have to worry
fortifies
about a
your
lease.
position.
Yeah, fortifies your position. So completely retrofitted it, and he had been engineering out of there for a very long time, and Steve had been another engineer and a performer there, and Matthew wanted to pass the torch, and I had kind of met Matthew very randomly. One of my students at Hennepin Tech was a hairdresser and cut his hair one day. Got his card from him, and we were talking. He's like, oh, I'm going to call him up for an internship. And I was like, cool. And I was working out of another space, Eightfold Path, and they were closing down. And I was looking for a new space to work out. I was like, hey, you still got that card from, that spot? And so called him up, and we clicked right away. And he's like, I'm looking for, other people to help engineer because I want this space to continue. And, my time has been kind of spent here. He's been making records for 20 years out of that place. So yeah. And now we have a couple other people that help engineer, but Steve's kind of the owner operator, brilliant engineer.
Cool. This is a tangent, but I'm too curious. Eightfold Path.
Yeah.
Was that nearby?
Yeah. That was probably...
That was in this neighborhood, right?
Yeah. So like 62 and Town Line, right on that corner,
Yep.
right over there. And kind of crazy enough, Greg Burnett, he's the person that opened it, graduate of Hennepin Tech, and just stopped by last night, like unbeknownst to anyone.
Really?
Just showed up, and I hadn't seen him in years. So yeah, he had taught a few classes at Hennepin Tech. So that's how we had gotten connected. And it was a really cool, not too dissimilar from this space, added onto a residence. And yeah, it was a lot of fun. Cut a lot of records in there, and yeah, right in this neck of the woods.
Yeah, I remember seeing that around the time I was getting started out here, and probably me setting up the Google business profile and that kind of stuff, and like Eightfold Path recording, and like but I don't think I've thought of that for like 15 years until you said that, and I was like, wait a minute, I remember that business.
And that Jeff Burnett, that's his brother. So the first time I had met Jeff was down in that studio and being like, hey, I heard he's playing guitar, and one of our clients had a guitar that the intonation was just like horrible. And I was like, can I borrow that guitar for this session? And he was just like, yeah, super cool. So it is a very small world.
No doubt. No, well, thank you for entertaining that little tangent.
I love a tangent.
Okay, cool. Well, let's dive into today's topic. Do you need to go to audio school? And, obviously there's a lot of different answers to this question. So I think the best way to break this down is let's talk about the pros, let's talk about the cons, and then the trade-offs in between. So I can kick it off, but the first thing that comes to mind with one of the pros of going to audio school is structured learning. If you're the type of person that thrives with structured learning, or knows that you struggle with like setting aside enough time to do the book work, quote unquote, whether that is just watching YouTube videos or whatever other path you're going to take, but you've got class times and you've got expectations and you've got a syllabus and homework. And that's a huge advantage to any sort of audio program you might go to. Yeah.
I mean, like for me, when I got into this, we didn't have the luxury of, YouTube. So the amount of information about recording now that's out there that's not the barrier, right, for anybody. If you have the ambition, you can find all the information out there. But I look at that pro, like you mentioned, as the structure component. When I first started playing drums, I just played songs that I heard, on records, right? And, I plateaued, right? So I eventually got lessons. And with that same mentality of going to school, right, that helped me progress so much faster because you had that structure. You had that, kind of accountability to somebody else besides yourself. And some people are just naturally gifted with that. They can pick up a new language, or they can pick up any skill, just like, here's a book, let me read about it. And now I'm a master of it because they have that. I kind of find that, creative types have a different personality about that sometimes. And sometimes that doesn't lend themselves as, being able to maybe suck as much of that information up and progress their skill as fast.
Yeah. I think traditionally when a lot of these programs got started, there was such a need for it because it was hard. It was difficult to learn. YouTube didn't exist.
Right.
Now it does. And there's a million courses and group coaching. And, there's so many ways that you can learn this. But on the flip side now, because there's so much, it can be a little bit overwhelming as to what source are you going to listen to. If you follow a bunch of producers on TikTok or Instagram, you're going to get a lot of contrary information.
Yeah.
And again, the recording process, the creative process, all of it might be true in different scenarios, but that can be confusing. So structured learning can help you have some reliable sources to help you sort out contrary information and know what your next step should be instead of jumping ahead too far in something. You cover some of the fundamentals so that you're in a good spot.
Yeah, and the fundamentals are the things that, kind of never change. The technology will change, and you need to adapt to it, and the tools and everything that we're utilizing will be different 5 years from now than they are. But, the fundamentals, I feel like for so many people, if they're lacking those, then the new tool comes out and it can really throw off what they're doing, right? But if you go back on those fundamentals, it's kind of like your technique. If you're a guitar player, right, or you're a drummer, you can learn something new, but if, you never quite figured out how to strum correctly, right, that might cap where you can get at for it. So I also look at it as students always ask, about certain things that they see online. It's like, in a way, some of the information can be curated for you a little bit more, and you can kind of call bullshit on what is bullshit. And that helps the students like critical analysis skills too. So like, they're learning to figure out like why that's incorrect thing that's out there, right? Like,
or in what scenarios it would be correct and what scenarios it would not be correct.
Right. Because we're in an industry where there's no rules, there's only guidelines, right?
Yeah.
Like, this microphone could be great on one thing and crap on another thing, but why that is, I think we try to teach a lot of the why behind stuff.
Yeah.
Not teach students what to do, but how to do the various things so that then they can, go and make their own creative decisions around it, right? Because there are no absolutes in a lot of parts of the creative process.
Yeah.
But having, a resource and a person and the immediacy of being in a studio with, an instructor and saying, this is what I'm thinking. Am I right or wrong? And this is why I'm thinking that way, has a lot of value for some people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think similarly, access to the instructor, but then access to professional equipment.
Yeah.
Because everything has a digital component now or a digital substitute now, but there can be some value to knowing what the real thing is.
Mm-hmm.
Talking hardware, for instance, like actually working on an 1176 and knowing what that sounds like and what basically the high-end professional stuff sounds like. Okay. And then when you are subbing out the digital version of it, whether it's a digital mic model or a digital emulation of an 1176 compressor, how does it sound? How does it compare?
Yeah.
Having some basis of like when everything is digital, nothing wrong with that in terms of using that in your workflow. But I do find like being able to relate it back to the real thing to some extent is helpful.
Yeah. And it is developing that critical listening component, I feel like, too, that is so important in it so that, as you are even comparing different digital plugins, right? Since you have analyzed what does this real thing sound like? Now, as you see version of this company's 1176 versus this 1176, right? Your ear and your brain are working together even better to figure out what the nuances are. And then you know the tool better, so you know how to apply it, right? Like lots of hammers out there, but some of them are good for tiny nails, some of them are good for big nails. But if you never, experienced the different settings that you'd use each one of them for, I can be kind of dumb sometimes and use the wrong tool for the job if I'm trying to be a DIYer because I don't have that training, right? Or that experience. So getting that listening experience is, I think, a really valuable component. Not having to buy it yourself and be able to hear it, right?
Kind of just knowing that like, okay, that's what the bigger studios are operating with and that's what that sounds like. Because I think you can certainly learn and get into it without having touched any of that stuff.
Sure.
And you'd be just fine, but it's one of the perks.
Yep.
Of like, now I do know what a real Neumann 47 sounds like.
Right.
Okay. And actually, and it might be that, and this cheaper version of it is quite good still, and that might be your takeaway. But that's helpful to know. Okay. Next pro, and I think this is the biggest one, personally, is networking.
Mm-hmm.
It's the people you meet, the students, the teachers, being in those programs, the people you get access to. I think that's the real big thing that you can come away with.
Yeah, it's a big, small world, as we already discussed, right? And especially in the Minnesota, Minneapolis, Midwest market, it seems like you're one person removed from just about anybody, right? Yeah. So, the students that come through, those relationships last their entire career. knowing this one person who then knows, say, somebody that's booking at a venue, right? Like most of the students tend to be musicians, so they want to be in that sphere of people, and knowing one person can give you 10 different contacts, right? And developing creative relationships. We've seen so many bands that come out of it, or like production teams, and seeing people that are different than you and getting their different perspectives. It just kind of forces you to grow, I think, faster in your creativity and what your different like career paths might be like. Because you don't know where you're going to end up 5 years from now getting into this, right? I never thought I'd be teaching, right?
Yeah.
And now I'm teaching, and the other classmates that I went to school with, I still am in touch with them, right? And bring them in for various things, and have had experiences as musicians with them, but also engineers, and also things that are just educational related, right?
Yeah.
Like you never know where things are going to go. Those bridges that are built lead to some pretty wild places.
The reality is that this industry is so much dependent on right place, right time, knowing this person for an opportunity that comes up. It has so much to do with your network and your connections.
Yeah.
Yes, you need to be talented and competent at what you do, but a lot of people are.
Yeah.
The difference maker, more times than not, can simply be your connections.
Right.
And if you aren't actively, you can be in your room on YouTube, becoming the best engineer, best producer in the world. But if you're not out making connections and nobody knows who you are, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
You will not get anywhere.
It's still, a lot of it is a relationship game, right? And you don't give yourself an opportunity to show what you can do to somebody, it won't come to you oftentimes, right? I'll kind of go into a little bit of a con, right? The degree doesn't get you a job, but it can give you the opportunity to meet people that the degree shows that you have experience in it.
Yeah.
And then you get to utilize that experience, right?
Yes.
But if you never give yourself that opportunity, it doesn't even exist, right?
And that's, that's my last point on my sort of pros list is credibility, credentials. Yeah. Do you need credentials? You don't, but they don't hurt.
Yeah.
It shows that you're serious about it. I've had potential interns and people reach out that want to become engineers or producers or whatever. Well, what have you done to become that?
Right.
What are you doing on your own so far? And if it's, I'm actively going to audio school, well, that's a good sign.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. That means you're doing what's in your power. If it's, I've self-produced these certain projects and I'm recording my friend's band and so on, that's another great sign. But if it's, I've done nothing but email you and now I want to become an intern, it's like, well, I'm looking for somebody that has put in some effort to be in this, because I can find somebody else that has. So it does work in your favor in that way. But on the flip side, it will not get you a job.
Right.
I don't care that you graduated. Are you good at it?
Yeah.
You still need to show your work.
It's still results oriented.
Yeah.
We're creating things, right? And I always think it helps you get to where you want to go maybe faster. Because if you took an intern on that was like in the old days where they showed up at your door before recording schools existed, they might have been so green that they might not have known what phantom power is, right? So then there's a natural just learning curve that it takes so much longer to get to a point where you could trust them to, say, set up all the mics, test the lines and make sure everything's ready to go, right? If you've gone to a recording school, the idea is that you have a baseline of knowledge, right? So you could probably expect that an intern that had graduated should be able to do that, right? And so that credibility factor comes with it. But beyond that, there are different pathways that sometimes do require a degree. If you're wanting to be in, say, a more corporate audio environment, sometimes HR departments, require a degree as a minimum and you get filtered out. So there is, advantages to where your life might be 5 to 10 years down the road that having that degree brings you. But it certainly isn't going to be get your degree and here comes your job,
No, those days are gone.
Yeah.
Let's take a minute to talk about our sponsor, Helvig Productions, which just so happens to be my studio. Are you a musician here in the Twin Cities, currently releasing music and ready to upgrade your sound? If you're tired of underwhelming recordings and want a polished, professional sound that gets people talking, we're here to help. We'll work with you to transform your next song into a production that feels impeccable, gets your friends singing along, and catches the attention of your soon-to-be new fans. And here's my guarantee. Give us 7 days to deliver a mix you love, or we'll keep working for free until you're 100% satisfied. If that sounds compelling, here's how it works. First, we'll start with a pre-production analysis where we focus on the core of everything, the songwriting and arrangement. We'll give you an honest, outside perspective to make sure your song is on track for the sound you want. And if it needs a few tweaks, we'll give you some tips and work with you to make improvements. If you want a deeper writing collaboration, we can bring in a specialized songwriter to assist. Either way, you keep full ownership of your music, no matter what. Once that's locked in, we'll jump into the professional recording and production process. This is where we capture the best performance of each part from start to finish. We'll handle everything from detailed recording to expert vocal production, editing, tuning, mixing, and mastering. Plus, all our best production assistants along the way. We've got top-notch gear, a great live room, and most importantly, over 15 years of experience helping artists get their best performances. This process has helped our clients build real fan bases and even land on Spotify playlists. We've got the results to back it up. Sharkoff built a fan base from scratch with over 99,000 YouTube subscribers and over 60 million views across platforms. Silver Warehouse got their very first single playlisted by Spotify, racking up over 3 million plays. Waltzing on Waves had a song from their debut album playlisted on Spotify, amassing 2 million plays. Ludwig landed sync deals with brands like Hyundai and shows like All American. And we've got over 80 5-star reviews on Google. So if that's all you need to hear and you're ready to chat, head to helvigproductions.com/let's connect or click the link in our show notes. We'll have you fill out a quick questionnaire, and if we're not a match, we'll let you know up front. We only work with clients who are a strong fit for our strengths because we're not satisfied until you are. If this sounds good to you, click that link and let's get started. I'm excited to see what we can create together. Are there any other pros that you think we need to mention before we move on to some of the cons?
I think it really is that just fast track. It gets you, if you need structure, I think we hit on a lot of them. Yeah, I think kind of nailed it.
All right. Let's talk about some of the disadvantages. I think the first thing that comes to mind is cost, right?
Mm-hmm.
Tuition is not free.
Yeah.
And Hennepin Tech is a very affordable program in comparison to what has existed and now not existed. A lot of the higher cost ones have closed, but there are very expensive programs still across the country that you can go with the promise of becoming a rock star at the end of them, and that's not going to happen. And then you end up with tens of thousands of dollars of debt,
right?
And that's a bad place to be in. And again, if you go into that with the thinking of this is all I have to do, and then I'm going to have a job,
right?
You're going to be in for a rude awakening at the end of that and a lot of debt. Yeah.
The understanding of what you're getting into and being realistic is, I think, the most important thing about considering that debt that you're going to go into and the cost for it. Yeah. Hennepin Tech is a Minnesota state college, so there's a subsidy that comes from it, which allows it to be more affordable for the student while we still, have good equipment and good spaces. But it is an investment. And if, you think of it that way, you want to balance what your return on investment is going to be. And if your goal is to, say, only make your own music, that might not be a balanced return on your investment, right? If your goal is to, make a career that allows you to be part of the music industry or part of the audio industry more broadly, not just music, that's a more long-term plan that you're kind of setting into place, right? And so having some of that credibility that comes with a degree might make more sense, but for some people it doesn't. A lot of the students that it doesn't work for weren't realistic about what they came in and wanted out of it, right? And then it really is a big con, right? Because now they do have some debt that doesn't go away. One person that came through and brought a group of high school students, I think, put it kind of interestingly, though. They said that taking a program like ours at Hennepin Tech, since it's relatively affordable compared to, some of the other programs that exist, is a very low risk opportunity to be able to pursue your dream because you have employable skills, tangible things that you can do, right, by learning audio. We kind of tell our students or tell people that we kind of trick people into learning audio by practicing with music because it's more fun, right? But that skill could be used in very many non-music, studio-related environments, right? They could go into live sound, or we have lots of people that work in like corporate audio now as like kind of a 9 to 5 to pay off their debt. And then they still have, nights and weekends if they want to, build out a freelance career, or, their long-term plan is to try to, be a studio owner, or, make music the main source of their income. And I thought that was a really cool way of putting it, that, it's not like you have to, if you're a musician, choose to like move out to LA. Like, we're going to try to make it as a band. Like, that's a high risk proposition, right?
Sure.
You have to have financial backing to be able to do that, right? You got to drop what you're doing. Whereas a affordable audio program gives you tangible skills, or provides some tangible skills for you that can take you a lot of different places. So it is a con if you don't know what you're trying to do with it, if that makes sense.
Yep. Yeah, definitely. We've talked about how structured learning and some of the resources can fast track you into getting there. But at the same time, you can find examples where the degree was just going to take too long.
Yep.
If you're a high performer and you're doing really well early on, there's a lot of stories of successful musicians dropping out of music school because this is going to take too long. I need to start doing it now.
Right.
Because at the end of the day, what really matters is your work. Show me your portfolio. What are you putting out? And that's what's going to get you the next job. And going through the program can end up slowing some of that down. You might have more time to pursue those things. If you have access to those resources and you have connections and things are working for you, you might be better off just pursuing those and getting real world experience right off the bat.
Right. Yeah. And we've had lots of students that do drop out and are successful because of that same thing. They were maybe beat makers and were already doing stuff before they came. And all of a sudden, they started working with some bigger people and they realized they kind of got what they needed from it.
Yeah.
Right. We can't be, a recording school can't be a one size fits all. Right. Like, we have a determined kind of outcome that we're trying to train students for, right? And so that's not for everybody. And two, if you are a fast learner and you came with previous skills, right, you might take a few classes or, look at what are available for classes and decide, do I need a structured learning for this? Or is this something I should just, kind of dig into and find like a mentor for, right? Or go out and, find a studio and see if you could intern for it.
Yep.
If you have those, kind of core skills already for it. Some people have made the argument against going to recording school that take the money that you would have spent on that and go buy it in gear. I think that's a little risky, but there's something to be said about practical application, right? And once you can do the thing that you're trying to do, go do it. And if that's through recording school, great. If it's halfway through, shit, I want to see people going out and being, successful, right? So even those students that do end up leaving like that, don't tell my boss, but I've told them to leave before, right? Like I can teach you nothing more. There's been lots of examples of that.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with it if you know what you're kind of looking for.
Yeah. There's multiple ways to achieve that goal. And if it ends up being that you only needed a year or a semester, then so be it. Or if you just realize that I'm not going to get what I need out of this program, then you might as well, if you decide you don't need a degree. Because the degree in and of itself can mean something depending on where you land in life.
Right.
The next thing I have on the list, we've already sort of alluded to a million times, but I'll bring it up anyways, which is just, it is no guarantee of success.
Yeah.
Just because you go through it and just because you're a straight A student in this program doesn't mean you're going to have any more chance in the audio business than somebody that didn't go through it at all. That's the reality of it, is that it comes down to how do you use that time? How do you use the network and the resources that are available to you? If you fully utilize them, great. That increases your chances.
Right.
But if you don't, if you think just going through the steps is going to somehow help you, it will not.
Yeah. There's a lot of people that you'll meet that are like, I went to recording school, that are not doing anything with their degree, right? They probably didn't give themselves as best of a chance to do something with it, right? Like you said, we're wanting to give people as many cards in their deck, right? And whether that card is, networking and meeting somebody that's in the year above them, right? And being like, oh, cool, they're going to graduate. They already have this thing lined up. Maybe I can, build off their connection that they already have, right? Because we click and that network is already started. Or if it's, they have a certification that they know they want to get into, say, audio post-production or game audio or something where Activision might want them to have a Pro Tools certification, right? Those are all cards, but you got to know when to play the cards. You got to have the cards in your deck and you got to be at the table to play the cards, right? So if you only come to class, leave class, do the bare minimum, it's not for you, right? It won't give you the thing that you're hoping it will.
Right.
Just the degree by itself. You really do have to immerse yourself in it and be a studio rat, right?
And to be clear, the only degrees that would ever do that for you are things that have massive demand.
Yeah.
There's just not enough labor force.
Yeah.
Maybe nursing.
Nursing would be,
that's where, sure, as long as you check that box, you can probably get employed.
Right.
Because we don't have enough of them.
Yeah.
We've got enough engineers.
There are.
And so that's not going to do it for you.
Yeah.
Okay. The last point I have on the cons, again, we've already kind of talked about it, but just there are self-teaching alternatives. There are really great self-teaching alternatives.
Yeah.
Obviously, there's a slew of YouTube influencers and social media influencers that have courses and free videos and paid coaching things that you can do. And maybe some of those click with you and you can learn on your own and the cost will be less and that gets you on your way. Maybe that's all you needed.
Yeah.
There's also internships and that sort of real world experience that can really jumpstart things for you. If you have access to those, that might be a great thing to start. And by the way, it's not either or. Those things can be great add-ons to a traditional schooling thing as well. And you should be heavily thinking of them if you have the time.
Yeah.
And try to do as much of it as possible because all of that adds to your chances of becoming employed or being successful at whatever you start.
Yeah.
Because the reality is, and this is specifically, we've said, audio school, and we've applied a lot about engineers, but this goes for music school as well.
Sure.
Whether, if you want to be a musician or an audio engineer or producer or a combination of all those things, I'd say it's kind of all in the same game. You should try to do everything you possibly can. So if you're going to school, you should still be looking at the self-teaching options. You should still be looking at an internship. Most of the time they're required to graduate. So don't wait. Start doing it right away.
No, you have to do it. Ultimately, I mean, I watch lots of, YouTube folks that are out there. I glean little tricks and tips and things like that all the time. I take some of those online courses because I want to be a sponge for the information.
Yeah.
It helps my students, but it also is a curiosity for me, right? Like this is such a lifelong learning pathway as a musician. All the creative fields are, in my opinion. And so if you don't, naturally have that desire to want to absorb all that information, it's probably not a good field for you, right? It's just like being a musician, right? If that was your professional goal is to be a musician and you learn music theory and your scales and everything on your instrument, and that's where it stopped, there's tens of thousands of other people that are pushing way harder than you, right? So those resources are amazing. And if I would have had those, frankly, I don't know what I would have done if I would have gone to audio school or not. Going through it, I'm really glad I did because I am kind of a space case, and having structure probably helped me get further than without it. But looking back at like how much I learned from my internship, right? Like there's no substitute for that. And I think contextualization around things that are in the self-paced, self-learning courses and features that are out there can be challenging for some people that they don't have context around when does this make sense or when doesn't it, right? So there's pros and cons to all of this, but if we had a takeaway from this, it's be informed, really about what you're getting into, take your time, absorb that information from all those sources. Talk to somebody at a recording school, talk to people in the industry.
Yeah.
That was something when I went to school that I had some classmates that was the sole reason they went to school, because studios were still, abundant in Minneapolis at that point. They just called all the studios and they were like, hey, if I wanted to work here, what would you be your recommendation? And at that point they were saying, yeah, go to school. Right, because they wanted you to have, those core skills,
base level of competency.
They were too busy still to, train you what fan of power is and what a bus is. So being informed, listening to this podcast is a great, great thing to do, because the cons could be big cons especially for cost if it isn't the right choice for you.
Yeah. All right, let's sum up some of these things, some of these trade-offs. I think the first thing you can kind of think about, and you ultimately have to do this through your own lens, your personality, your strengths and weaknesses, your network, your connections. Maybe you are listening to this and like Matt and I grew currently out in like rural Minnesota where both of us grew up. There is no music scene. You have no connections in the industry. Yep. An audio school can be a great way to like make your first friends and get things started.
Right.
And if you wanted to get a degree anyways, getting a degree in general music or specifically at a tech program like Hennepin Tech, that can be an excellent way to start.
Yeah.
To get your feet wet in the world of music and start meeting people. But on the other hand, you can also just move to the Twin Cities.
Sure.
And start going to shows.
Dive in.
So the trade-off is, kind of like the value of that certification versus the value of real world experience.
Yep.
Like you said, there's no competing with an internship, and you might be able to just get one. You never know. And so how does that work for you? What do you think is more likely for yourself? What's more appealing to you? I think that's the first trade-off.
Yeah.
The second trade-off, I think, is return on investment.
Yep.
do you have the money to put into it? For some kids, it's going to be no. I just don't right now.
Yeah.
And maybe it's best to start with some self-teaching stuff, some cheaper alternatives, and then decide it. For others, maybe they're comfortable with loans and tuition, and they know they're going to go more of a traditional route and go to a school. That's fine too. But then if you're taking out that kind of investment, make sure you're putting as much into that time as you can. Capitalize on it. You
need to, capitalize is a really good word. Making a lifelong decision at 18 for your career that involves, for our program, it's, I think, $18,000 when all is said and done. That's a lot of money, right? And at 18, I look back at decisions that I made, and that was a good one long term. But I made a lot of really dumb decisions at 18, right? And if you're not sure, kick the tires, like you said, with something else. Take a year, get into the scene, figure out if you can network by yourself, and if you can use those online tools that are less expensive. You don't need to go straight for the most expensive car right away if you can find an automobile that'll get you where you need to go for less for cheaper, right? Yeah. So we see a lot of our actually most successful students are the ones that have kind of taken that track where they've kind of figured out who they are a little bit beforehand, right? Because I know I needed it to help me break out of my shell a little bit more too, right? And make those connections and get into that. But there's others that just walk into a room and they can make friends and, build that right away.
Yeah, it's like are you good at networking in a classroom, or are you going to be good at networking out in the real world industry?
Right.
Because if you're that kind of extrovert, easy to talk to person, you might be limited in a classroom because you'll know everybody on day one.
Yep.
But a lot of, especially audio engineers, I feel like can be a little bit more introverted.
Yeah.
And so the classroom is a much easier environment to start building a network than like going to a show by yourself or something.
Yeah.
Like that's too daunting for some people.
Right.
So knowing that about yourself, that's another big trade-off. I think the last point that I can think of is just if the program you want to go to, whether it's a music school or an audio specific tech school, are they keeping up with the industry?
Sure.
Like, are they adapting to what's currently going on right now? Or are they still doing it from 10, 15 years ago and teaching old principles that are out of touch with where the industry is going? Are they saying the things that resonate with where you think the industry is going to? Teaching you how to be entrepreneurial, for instance. That should be a case for all music programs.
Yeah.
That is where the industry is going. Pretty much everybody is creating their own jobs.
Right.
There are still employed jobs, but fewer and fewer all the time in terms of the creative side, not the corporate side of audio. You have to be your own CEO.
Yeah.
And that should be a part of your program and part of that teaching. So I think looking and making sure that your program feels like that you're enrolling in is going to give you the skills that you need for today, for tomorrow. Just make sure that it's not antiquated.
Yeah. There's a lot of change happening really, really fast right now. And just technology wise, but also industry wise, and how technology is changing our industry, right? Where we're at right now is going to be very different than 2-3 years from now. So I think that is a very, very important part of figuring out if it's right for you and where you're going, if that's the right place for you.
Cool. All right. Well, I feel like we covered most of the highlights.
Spots,
yeah. So if you listen to this whole thing and you're like, cool, audio school's for me, hit up Matt, hit up Hennepin Tech, do a tour. I'm sure you guys are happy to entertain conversations and make sure it's the right fit, and ask questions, be picky, try to make sure it's the right fit. And there's obviously other programs around the country, and a lot of schools have smaller, less dedicated audio programs that can be kind of on the side, if that makes sense. And if you listen to this and you said, I'm going to do it myself, I think I am the self-starter, I can learn, I love following creators online, I'm already learning and doing a lot of stuff, what are my next steps? Or it just excites me, and that's what I want to try first. We did talk a little bit about where we think the best place is, and this is for absolute beginners. So if you're like, I want to get into this, but where do I begin? What do you recommend?
So, a simple laptop setup or, PC, doesn't even have to be Mac. Could be, on the Windows platform.
I mean, it can be, but it shouldn't.
Right. It should be Mac. No endorsements have been provided to me to say that. But yeah, having, some sort of computer setup that's relatively modern, and, the Focusrite 2i2 has become like the standard of my first setup.
Entry level.
It works great.
And explain what an interface is quick.
Sure. So an interface allows you to take, your microphone that has a XLR cable, and you can look on your computer everywhere and you won't find an XLR input on there, right? So think of it like an adapter. It allows you to get your audio signals, albeit from a microphone or your guitar or keyboard, and convert it over so you can plug it in through USB or some computer connection.
Takes that analog sound and makes it into ones and zeros in your computer.
Yep. So then from there, you want to have something to plug into it, right? So a microphone. You don't need the nicest microphone out there.
No.
Get yourself something that fits your budget. And I would argue, a less expensive mic is a very valid way to learn, because it's going to push you to really listen to what it's doing and to understand where its strengths and its weaknesses are. There's no one perfect mic. If there was, there wouldn't be, thousands of mics in Sweetwater's catalog, right? So, an SM57 or an SM58 from Shure is a very common starting point. Only costs like $100. So, that works great for vocals. You could record your guitar amp with that. If you are a guitar player or a keyboard player, you can plug right into your interface, capture your sounds there. You need something to record them on. So you need an application. A DAW is what it's normally called. If you're a Mac user, I would highly recommend Logic. It is such a good bang for your buck.
Yeah.
As a creator, you get such a range of different virtual sounds that you have at your fingertips. You can do all the different recording features that you might do in a more expensive application like Pro Tools, but it's a great beginner's tool, and it ranges from kind of like any genre, right? So you could record all acoustic music in it or all electronic music with it. So I think that's probably one of the best bang for your buck DAWs
it's fantastic.
out there. Yeah. I mean, there's Ableton, there's FL.
And those can work if you're on a Windows
Those
machine.
can work if you're on a Windows machine as well. Yeah. Lots of people use Ableton, and that also has a ton of features as well to it. I would maybe argue that Logic is a little more user-friendly right away out of the box. If you're learning this stuff, right, you kind of want to have your learning curve to creativity curve to be at the, similar spot. So if I got an idea in Logic, I can kind of press one button and I've got this sound and I record, right?
Mm-hmm.
So with, a computer that is of sufficient power, that audio interface that allows you to get your analog signals into digital, and a basic DAW like Logic or Ableton, you don't have to spend that much money.
You can get it all done for $500-$600.
Yeah.
Well, not minus the computer. And a note on the computer, I do think that that's probably one of the most important pieces that you buy. And it's important to try to get the nicest one you can.
Yeah.
Because that will be the first thing to slow you down. And it's important that you understand really how to use a computer and get some basic understanding around that, because you're going to be installing software as you go, and being able to troubleshoot where files are exactly and all that kind of stuff is really important. I've had people ask me like, well, what kind of computer, how do I do this? And ultimately, you want to try to buy the largest processor that you can get. And then having pretty much every DAW at this point has a minimum of 8 gigs of RAM. I would try to double that.
Yeah.
Try to get to 16 gigs of RAM and then buy the biggest processor you can. You can always add more hard drive space and stuff, but make sure you have a large enough internal hard drive to keep, your basic applications on, probably no less than 500 gigabytes. But you can buy external drives for additional storage if you need to, but you can't really upgrade the processor.
No.
And so you want to get as big of a processor as you can. I don't need to tell you how big because it's going to change next year.
Right.
But the fact of the matter is right now, even your average or mid-tier laptop, for instance, is going to be more than enough.
You could get a MacBook Air, which is their lowest cost one. And that has more processing power than probably most of the computers that we cut records on 5 years ago, right?
Yeah.
And
where it's at now is insane.
Yeah.
But so even buying base level is going to be fine. But point being is if you go up from that, if you can afford to, you don't have to upgrade your computer as often.
Right.
And it will save you money in the long run. So on that note, with the interface, with the microphone, with the headphones that you buy and the cable that you buy and all that kind of stuff, there is a trade-off between, all right, just start cheap and get into it and then upgrade as you want to, especially if you're not sure how serious you are about it at the time. But if you go up a little bit and you start buying things that at least you've heard of, like the SM7B classic vocal mic that's like $300-$400.
Yep.
If you buy stuff that's a little bit more popular, a little bit more name brand, if you choose not to use it, or if you're ready to upgrade from it, it will be easier to sell.
Right.
Those things tend to hold value versus if you buy the cheapest microphone you can find on Amazon, that won't be worth any money.
Right.
You'll never sell it, basically.
Right.
So thinking about maybe finding a nice middle ground where I see this mic is recommended on a lot of forums. It's a name I kind of recognize, whatever. Just thinking about, I can probably, if it's popular, I can probably find it used. And buying used is a great way to get started. I highly recommend it. And then you can also sell it if it's not the right fit for some reason and not be out a whole lot of money or any money potentially.
Right. And technology dates really fast.
Yeah.
Right. A microphone fundamentally is doing the same thing that it was doing 50 years ago, right? I mean, this microphone is.
Yeah.
So, an SM57 versus an SM7 both kind of hold their value to a certain degree.
Oh, yeah.
So buy them used, and if it works, it's probably going to stay working so long as you don't drop it on the floor.
And if you decide you want to switch to a different mic, you'll probably be able to sell it for about what you bought it for used. Right. And that can be a really helpful thing when you're not sure what you need.
Exactly.
So just buying used and looking into like what's really, really popular, because then you can at least sell it. Somebody else will want it. But yeah, don't forget that you need headphones, if you need speakers, that kind of stuff. I don't think it's super helpful to say, I recommend these set of speakers.
Sure.
Just go on Google and type in most popular, top rated, entry level speakers.
Yeah.
There'll be 3 of them. Pick one.
Yeah.
And you'll be fine. You can do that with mics. You can do that with interfaces. And there'll be tons of information. Pick one. And then especially if you can go on Facebook Marketplace or Craigslist and buy it used,
Yep.
if you change your mind, it'll be fine.
Yeah.
But it's harder to change your mind on laptops. So spend some time on that and put more money in there. Then just start creating.
Yeah. See what you can do with it.
Yeah.
Right. The tool will not make the product if you don't have a good source for it. So, if you don't have a good song, the microphone's not going to help you, right? The software is not going to help you. So yeah, don't let the technology and the tools steal too much of your attention. Get something that works and then do something with it. Squeeze as much out of it as you can until you find then the tool starts to hold you back.
Correct.
Right. So if I am, recording vocals and guitar at the same time, and then all of a sudden I want to bring a drummer in or a keyboard. Oh, I don't have enough inputs now. That necessitates now you upgrade, right? Rather than getting something that can allow 8 microphones at once, but you're only ever recording yourself.
But there's a lot of creativity when there's restrictions.
There is.
So figuring out, well, how could I do this with one microphone?
Yeah.
Can yield some really cool results. So don't always focus on like, oh, this is the gear I'm missing. Because that's really easy to do when you're getting started.
Yeah.
Is to think about all the stuff you don't have. Figure out how you can make it work with what you do.
Mm-hmm.
And keep working, and you can upgrade as you feel comfortable doing so.
Yeah.
But if you stay in the used world too, that really makes, buying and selling a lot less risky.
Yeah. Lower risk is what you want when you're experimenting.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say the other part of the startup, if you're going to do it on your own, is follow some creators that you like their videos, you like their teaching style, but then eventually if there is a subscription or a course or something, pay for it.
Yeah.
Pay for Mix with the Masters or Pure Mix or something like that if you're an engineer, or some sort of online Berkeley semester that's cheaper or whatever for, songwriting, if that's what you're into, and invest some of that money into gear and some of that money into education.
Yeah.
So that you have continually somewhere to go for new information and to continue learning, because it is a never ending process. It's a lifetime of learning new stuff. So you do need to be learning by doing, but you also need some time where you're just watching somebody else do it or somebody else talk about a subject that knows more about it than you do.
It's being challenged, right? You're forcing yourself to be challenged by this new information, right? Giving yourself new options to explore and, connect new dots with your own creativity. So you'll find you'll plateau pretty fast if you aren't pushing or creating a system that you can push yourself in, right?
Yep. Yeah. All right. Is there anything else that you think is important that we mentioned before we wrap this up?
Man, we've talked about a lot, and I've rambled on a lot of things.
Me too.
So I don't know. I think we've hit a bunch. Hit me up if you got any questions. I'm happy to always, entertain somebody, come to the program and you can, grill me on if it's for you or not. I want people to be informed and, if it works, it works. And if it doesn't, it doesn't. But yeah, kind of don't get yourself into something you don't need, right?
Yeah. Make sure it's the right fit.
Make sure it's the right fit. Yeah.
Thank you so much for your time today.
Hey,
I appreciate your knowledge and your insight into this question. Before I let you go, one question I ask everybody at the end of each episode is if you'd like to share a secret to the scene, something that you would have liked to have heard when you were coming up, something that maybe comes to mind from reflecting on this episode, or just a general piece of advice that you think is helpful as you navigate the local music scene.
Always be curious. Always be curious about other people, how they got into it, how their journey went. Just that curiosity, I think, will keep you always progressing in technology, learning something, in how can you be better. It will help the plateaus and the stagnations that just naturally come from trying to advance in this wacky world of creativity that we all live in, That curiosity, I think, has served at least myself really well, and probably been one of the reasons that a pretty introverted person from the middle of nowhere, Minnesota, has been able to, work with really cool, awesome people and do really fun things in this music world.
Yeah, well said. I agree. I think curiosity is such an underrated skill that you can develop, particularly the longer you're in it.
Yeah.
It can also be a defense against the natural tendency to get frustrated or jaded about things or envious about things. That if curiosity comes first for you, and it's something that you really practice, it leads to solutions.
Right.
It leads to healthier conversations. It leads to new friends, and it will prevent some of those negative things from creeping up first.
Yeah. No, it is a driving factor, I think, for a lot of creative growth.
Yeah.
For myself too, just, self-growth, being able to find those positive things out of falling flat on your face, right? Like, I screwed this up. Why was that? Talk to somebody, but like, okay, there's so many cliches about you learn more from your failures than your successes, right? But like, if you don't have the curiosity part of like, why did I screw up? Then it can just be a failure that you didn't learn anything from, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Curiosity can turn those things into a learning experience, and can turn why did they get that into, why did they get that?
Right.
So much better mindset.
Yep.
And it can teach something versus just being angry or disappointed about something.
We're getting deep here. I like this. I like this, wrapping it up on the deep side.
Yeah, man. Well, thank you so much again for doing this. If people want to reach out, what do you prefer for contact methods?
Yeah, you can email me. It's just matt.holmes, HOLMES, at hennepintech.edu, or just, go to our website, hennepintech.edu, and you can look for the audio area, and I'm the main contact on there.
Excellent. We'll include that information in the show notes.
Thanks.
And seriously, don't be shy. Reach out if you want to ask some more questions. I know that Matt would be happy to help and make sure that you make the right decision.
Yeah.
So
that's key.
Matt, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Steve.
Everybody that tuned in, this is the end of season 1. Thank you so much. We love all of you. Thank you so much for your support. We'll see you in season 2.